Hello and welcome to another episode of Everybody Hates Your Brand, the podcast for all things marketing. Today's episode is a hard-rockin one where I talk about what AC/DC can teach us about building a brand. You might not think marketing professor Byron Sharp and hard rock legends AC/DC have much in common, but it turns out they have a similar view as to how to build a brand, whether they know it or not. You probably know Byron Sharp from the seismic shift in marketing that occurred in 2010 with the publication of his book, How Brands Grow. It proposed an alternative view of marketing effectiveness to the traditional approach that had dominated until then. Prior to its publication, the focus was on segmenting, targeting, positioning, unique selling points, differentiation, loyalty, and brand love. Byron Sharp's book cuts straight through that with a focus on empirical data, the scientific method, and a ruthless lack of sympathy for the traditional approach. Now, there's still some debate on the value of targeting, positioning, segmenting, loyalty, those kind of elements, but some of the empirical evidence that Byron Sharp produced has now become core to what we all understand about how to build a brand. So I was struck, or you might say thunderstruck, the other day with a good case study that could bring some of those principles to life, which is how we arrive here at AC/DC. Now, I can't believe there are many people who aren't aware of AC/DC, but just in case, they are an Australian hard rock band formed in Sydney in 1973 by Scottish-born brothers Malcolm and Angus Young. They have sold over 200 million albums worldwide, with their seminal album Back in Black becoming the second best-selling album of all time, with only Thriller by Michael Jackson ahead of it. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003 and regularly fill the largest stadiums on earth when they go on tour. The band are all now well into their 60s, but released the critically acclaimed album Power Up in 2020, which charts at number 1 in the US, UK, Germany, and their home turf of Australia. So, how have they managed to do all that and still stay as popular as they ever were, some 50 years into their career? Well, Byron Sharp's rules can give us a clue, and maybe you can take some lessons from AC/DC. Essentially, Byron Sharp posits that to grow a brand, you need to create, strengthen, and preserve two things: mental availability and physical availability. And we're going to take each of those in turn. So let's start with mental availability. Mental availability is the likelihood that a buyer will notice, recognize, and or think of a brand in buying situations. Fundamentally, therefore, it's about memory, and they need to build and reinforce brand-linked memory structures that make the brand easier to notice and buy. In order to do that, you need to do three things: create distinctive brand assets, be consistent yet fresh and interesting, and create an emotional response that is connected to your brand. So let's see how AC/DC managed to tick all those boxes. So let's start with creating distinctive brand assets. If I showed you a Nike swoosh, if I played you the I'm Lovin' It jingle, or presented you with a silhouette of a Coke bottle, you would instantly be able to tell me the name of the brand. These distinctive brand assets, or codes, are ingrained in our brains and are mental shortcuts that create familiarity. In psychological terms, familiarity doesn't breed contempt. Instead, it creates a positive attitude towards said brand. AC/DC have developed some of the most distinctive brand assets of any band, both visually and sonically. If I were to show you a guitarist playing a Gibson SG in a schoolboy outfit, a lead singer in a vest, jeans and flat cap, or the distinctive font derived from their logo, a large proportion of the population will be able to associate those with AC/DC. But it's not just the visuals that make AC/DC distinctive, it's how they sound. A lot of people, read No Taste Philistines, dismiss AC/DC as meat and potatoes, blues-based pub rock. 3 chords and a 4 on the floor beat. Simplistic, lacking in nuance, subtlety and complexity. But they could not be further from the truth. Yes, some of the riffs are simple, but as anyone who works in advertising will tell you, effective simplicity is really hard to achieve. Technical wizardry and complexity is difficult, but writing a simple driving riff that becomes iconic, that's hard. Doing that while making it sound distinctively yours, harder again. AC/DC have a hugely distinctive sound, a combination of riffs, tone and vocals that can only be them. The secret, for example, to some of the best riffs AC/DC have come up with is silence. Ironic for a band who play through stacks of Marshall amps, but listen to these. Those riffs were from Back in Black, Highway to Hell, You Shook Me All Night Long, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and TNT. All of them have riffs that have silence written into them, which makes them distinctively AC/DC. You might have listened to the tone of the guitars, very similar. Angus and Malcolm, the two main guitarists in the band's history, have basically played the same amps, Marshall super leads and super basses respectively, and guitars, an SG for Angus and a Gretsch G6131 Jet Firebird for Malcolm, and they've played them forever. To quote Angus's guitar tech, Angus won't change anything if he doesn't have to. When you listen to the vocals, both singer Bon Scott and his successor Brian Johnson, after Bon's tragic death in 1980, have a vocal tone that's very distinctive, a high register with a gravelly delivery. In fact, when Brian Johnson had to pull out of a tour for hearing issues in 2016, the only person who could get close was Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. So, what are the implications for creating distinctive assets for marketers? Well, distinctive brand assets are a marketer's best friend. They are the mental shortcuts that enable customers to remember a brand in a buying situation. The key thing to note, if you have distinctive assets, do not change them. I get it. Maybe the logos or colours aren't to your taste. Maybe you're a new CMO desperate to make your mark and a rebrand feels like a nice dramatic way to make your mark. Or because you see them every day, you start to get bored. Or maybe your creative agency starts to get bored. You fail to realise that customers are not living the brand like you do. But please resist the urge to change them, especially if you're working in distinctive assets that have years of heritage. If you don't already have distinctive brand assets, you need to develop some. Professor Mark Ritson of Marketing Week, column Fame, reckons you need 3 or 4, a logo, a colour, an image, and maybe a sound. So that leads us on to number 2, about being consistent and yet fresh and interesting. Building distinctive assets is key, but the reason we associate all those assets to AC/DC is because of their consistent use. They have created those visual and oral assets that are distinctively them and stuck with them. If you look at the history of their album covers, you'll note that the logo rarely changes. The few exceptions are all notably from early in the band's career. You'll also note that Angus, his SG, and his schoolboy outfit are hugely prevalent. Angus started wearing that outfit from before his time in the band and continues to wear it on stage to this day. He plays the same guitars and amps, and in some cases not just the same model but the actual guitar. Lead singer Brian Johnson's worn the same vest, jeans and flat cap on stage since he joined in 1980. And then there's the consistent sound of the band. I'm going to quote Angus again. Our art is there is no art. The critics' view is always they've just made an album and it's exactly the same as the last one. Well, I'll have 17 of them anytime. A lot of bands can chop and change their style into almost anything. We've never gotten sidetracked like that. We know what we do best and we've never strayed from it. If we did, then it wouldn't be AC/DC. I mean, if I want to hear some reggae, then I'll buy a fucking Bob Marley album. And yet, whilst AC/DC have, in their own words, kept it consistent over the years, they haven't necessarily stood still, making changes between key albums. Here's an example from an article in Kerrang! Magazine. There are those that will argue that AC/DC's approach to songwriting has never actually changed. That in itself is a falsehood. Powerage, released in May 1978, captures the band at their most hooligan on tracks like Rock and Roll Damnation, Sin City and the sheer battery of riffraff. In contrast, Powerage's successor, Highway to Hell, is infinitely more polished. Play both albums back to back and the songwriting development on the album is evident. The choruses are bigger, the guitars are sharper, and Bon's vocals sound richer. So, whilst they have stayed true to what AC/DC is, they have tweaked their music and their production over the years to keep it interesting. So what can marketers learn? Well, consistency and repetition are not sexy, but they are the bedrock of creating distinctive brand assets. I used to complain all the time about the brand police, quote unquote, in various clients, but now I actually get why they were so strict. Ensuring the salience of your brand codes in your communications is crucial. Professor Mark Ritson, again, puts it this way in his usual inimitable style. If you aren't overdoing your codes, you aren't getting it. Unless you're vomiting because you're so sick of them, do it more. You're underplaying your codes because to you they seem obvious, but to the customer they are gone in a second. You cannot overplay codes. Once you've created something distinctive and consistently drummed it into your customers and potential customers' minds, you can start to freshen things up. But be warned, don't do this too soon. It takes a long time for codes to be established enough for you to completely change or tweak them. Resist the urge to play. Mark Ritson even suggests 40 years of consistency before trying anything. But if you've inherited some historic brand codes, then maybe you can play around with your brand's distinctiveness for great effect. And the final key to mental availability is to create an emotional response that's connected to your brand. According to the chapter All You Need Is Emotion, Really? By Phil Barden in the book Eat Your Greens, generating emotion is crucial to generating memory structures. To quote, "In order to survive and to optimize future decisions and actions, it was especially important to store and remember those objects and situations that evoked a strong emotional response. So, if an ad is emotionally engaging, we are more likely to store it. This contributes to the recall of the ad and also increases the mental availability of the brand." But creating emotion is not enough. Any emotion has to be tied back to the brand in order for the emotion to create memory and mental availability. So again, to quote Phil Barden, to leverage the potential of the arousal, the brand/product needs to be the agent that triggers the response. Now, tying this back to AC/DC, music is an emotion driver on many levels, and they're all positive emotions largely. It creates memory structures that endure long after other forms of memory, largely because it engages many parts of the brain, triggering connections and creating associations. Music is also hugely important in deriving an identity. It creates a sense of belonging with others of a similar passion. AC/DC have created music that speaks to a lot of people. Their music has helped people party, get laid, deal with anger, and loads more. It has inspired a million cover bands and other artists to create their own music. Their gigs are huge, cathartic displays of love and passion. They create a loyalty in their fan base that is extraordinary. So what are the implications? Well, behavioural science has for years told us that the idea of people making purely rational decisions is nonsense. Now we know that creating an emotional response to a brand's advertising creates stronger memory structures. If you're advertising as a rational list of product features, you're making a big mistake, whether B2B or B2C. The use of emotion is crucial. Now, when you're lower down the funnel and you're trying to drive immediate sales, more rational messaging is appropriate. But even then, emotion can help customers make that final decision to buy. And now, on to the other availability, physical availability. Physical availability is essentially how easy your brand is to find and can be sort of broken down into three components. 1, presence, are you where you should be? 2, prominence, are you easy to find? And 3, relevance, are you buyable? AC/DC understood this without knowing the theory. There are 2 elements of physical availability for a band. 1, playing live, and 2, being able to buy and listen to their recorded music and merchandise. In terms of playing live, obviously a live band can only be in one place at a time. But AC/DC understood that they need to be out on the road, playing live, building a fan base. People needed to see them, and they went to great lengths to do that consistently. There's that word again. To quote Jeff Barton from his article, How AC/DC Conquered the World from the Back of a Van, "It's going to take a good 3.5 hours to get back to London, but AC/DC don't seem to mind. To them, it's just a short trip, a skip around the block. A 6 gigs a week band in Australia, they think nothing of trundling huge distances across vast deserts and open spaces, using only scruffy dirt tracks to travel from one venue to another." In terms of selling music and merchandise, AC/DC have been smart in getting their music and brand out there for consumption. Clearly, in today's music industry, it's easier than ever to get music out to people through streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube, which have AC/DC eventually embraced. But over the years, AC/DC struck exclusive deals with Walmart, licensed their music to game companies, iOS apps, and sports franchises. I mean, how often do you hear Thunderstruck at sports events? It's a lot. Their music is in films and commercials, the Marvel Studios Iron Man trilogy being a special highlight, which even produced a soundtrack/greatest hits album for Iron Man 2. They have leveraged their brand into everything from neckties to red wine to a line of Converse Chuck Taylors, and even a Monopoly board game. So, what are the implications? Improving your physical availability is one of the quickest routes to major brand growth. How can you increase your prevalence, prominence, and relevance? If you're a single channel brand, could you look at becoming multi-channel? If you're a direct-to-consumer brand, could you get into established retailers as well? Can you pay retailers to give your brand more prominence in a given store? I would consider that search rankings are essentially digital shelves. If you're not on the first search page, you're essentially not on the shelf. So how can you improve your SEO or pay to be where you need to be seen? And that brings me to the bottom line. AC/DC are legends. They are still massively influential after decades in the music business, still selling out stadiums, and they have a lot to teach marketers about longevity and building a brand. Remember, consistency distinctiveness, and emotion create and reinforce memory structures that are the core elements of building and growing mental availability. And maximising your physical availability in terms of presence, prominence, and relevance is crucial. And lastly, just remember, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Okay, well, I hope you found that journey into AC/DC and branding interesting. It's a lot of fun to talk about, a band that I'm hugely passionate about. Keep your eyes open for the next podcast, which will be coming to your favourite podcast provider soon. And in the words of my mother, take great care and be vigilant.